When we picture the most dangerous criminals in modern Britain, we almost always picture men. Men with records, men with violence in their history, men we were taught to watch out for. The women in our lives, the mothers, the wives, the girlfriends, the neighbours, the daughters, are the people we are told represent safety. But for the victims in these cases, safety never came. The knife was held by a woman. The plan was made by a woman. The lie that fooled the police was told by a woman. Children died under the watch of their own mothers. Partners died in kitchens and on country lanes. Strangers died because a woman decided she simply wanted them to. And the courts gave these women some of the longest sentences in British legal history. Today, we are covering 10 of the most notorious women connected to Birmingham and the wider West Midlands region, who are now serving life behind bars. What you are about to hear will quietly destroy the idea that danger has a gender, and show you how ordinary a woman can look right up to the moment she becomes a killer. Case 1. Amy Betro. On the evening of September 7th, 2019, a woman in a flowing black niqab stood in a quiet cul-de-sac in South Yardley, Birmingham, and pointed a loaded handgun at a man climbing out of his car. She was 3 feet away from him. She pulled the trigger. The gun jammed. That mechanical failure is the only reason Sikandar Ali is alive today, and it is the only reason this case ended in a conspiracy to murder conviction rather than a murder trial. The woman behind the niqab was Amy Jean Betro, a 45-year-old American from Stevens Point, Wisconsin, who had flown more than 4,000 miles from the United States to carry out a revenge attack for 2 men she had met online. She fled the country the next day and spent 5 years on the run across 3 continents before British justice finally caught up with her. But Amy Betro did not start life as a transatlantic hitwoman. To understand how an American disc golfer ended up wearing a niqab on a Birmingham street, we have to go back years before the shooting. Amy Betro was born on August 27, 1979, and grew up in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. She attended the local high school and graduated in the late 1990s. Before her life turned criminal, she was known in Wisconsin as a competitive disc golfer, a niche sport played by throwing frisbees into metal baskets. By 2018, she had drifted into online relationships with men overseas, and one of those connections would change everything. She began speaking to Mohammed Nazir, a man from Derby in the English Midlands. According to the prosecutor at her trial, Nazir became her long-distance lover. What Betro did not know, or perhaps did not care about, was that Nazir and his father Mohammed Aslam were nursing a violent grudge against a Birmingham shopkeeper, and they were looking for someone willing to finish it. The grudge had nothing to do with Amy Betro. It was born in a clothing shop in Birmingham over a year before she ever set foot in England, and it was the kind of ordinary business dispute that should never have escalated to a bullet. In July 2018, Mohammed Aslam and his son Mohammed Nazir walked into Seher Boutique, a clothing shop in Birmingham owned by a man named Aslat Muhammad. The argument was reportedly about the price of a wedding suit. It turned into a brawl. Aslam sustained brain injuries during the fight that had a lasting impact on his cognitive function. That same day, the windows of Aslam and Nazir's home were smashed, allegedly by associates of the shopkeeper. From that moment, the father and son began planning revenge, not against Muhammad himself, but against his family. By 2019, that plan had found an unlikely executioner. On August 22, 2019, Amy Betro flew into Manchester Airport. She posed as a tourist, posting photos from the London Eye and other landmarks. On September 4th, she visited Nazir in Derby, where mobile phone footage later recovered by police showed a handgun being test-fired on wasteland near the A38. The gun jammed during the test. 3 days later, she used the same weapon in Birmingham. What happened on the evening of September 7, 2019, unfolded on a quiet suburban street in broad view of the family's CCTV camera, and the footage would later play a central role in convicting her. On the afternoon of September 7th, Betro left her Birmingham hotel wearing a summer dress, a hoodie and flip-flops. Later that day, she bought a silver Mercedes E240 from a car dealer, wearing the same outfit. That Mercedes became both her attack vehicle and her planned escape car. That evening, she drove to Measham Grove in South Yardley, a quiet residential cul-de-sac. Sikandar Ali, the son of the shopkeeper Aslat Muhammad, had just returned home and was getting out of his car. Betro, now covered head to toe in a black niqab to hide her identity, approached him. She raised the handgun and pulled the trigger at point-blank range. Nothing happened. The same jamming problem that had shown up during the test firing 3 days earlier had saved his life. Ali slammed his car door, which struck the open door of Betro's Mercedes, and sped away. A few hours later, Betro came back. She fired 3 bullets through the bedroom windows of the Ali family home, then fled. The next morning, September 8, 2019, she boarded a flight out of the United Kingdom and disappeared. The bullets had missed everyone in the house, but Betro had left something far more dangerous than a bullet behind, and forensic scientists would pull it apart for the next 5 years. West Midlands police recovered the abandoned Mercedes within days. Inside was a single black glove. The glove carried Betro's DNA. Her DNA was also found on packages connected to a separate plot, one where Nazir and Betro had tried to frame a rival in Derby by posting illegal ammunition from the United States to his home. The problem for investigators was simple. Betro's DNA profile did not match anyone on any British database. An international manhunt began. The FBI, the National Crime Agency, the Crown Prosecution Service, Derbyshire Constabulary, and later the Armenian government all became involved. CCTV from her hotel, the car dealership, petrol stations, and the attack scene itself built a detailed picture of her time in the UK. The niqab disguise, police later noted, was fairly poor. Her flip-flops never changed. Her phone never changed. Investigators could follow her through the city. In July 2024, nearly 5 years after the shooting, Betro was tracked down in Armenia and arrested. She was extradited back to the United Kingdom in January 2025. At Birmingham Crown Court on 12 August 2025, a jury found her guilty on all 3 counts, and 9 days later, she was sentenced to 30 years behind bars. Amy Betro crossed an ocean and a continent because she thought loyalty to a man she barely knew was worth a stranger's life. The next woman on our list did not need to cross an ocean to destroy her partner. She only needed to drive him home from the pub one Sunday night and then look a nation in the eye and lie about it for 7 months. Case 2. Tracy Andrews. On Sunday 1st December 1996, just before 10 p.m, a man on Cooper's Hill in Alvechurch, Worcestershire, heard a commotion outside his friend's house. He walked out to investigate and found a white Ford Escort parked neatly on the side of the country road. A man lay crumpled in the lay-by beside it, soaked in blood. A woman stood over him, covered in blood herself, screaming for help. The man on the ground was Lee Raymond Dean Harvey, a 25-year-old father of 1. The woman was his 27-year-old fiancée, Tracy Marguerite Andrews, an aspiring model who worked as a barmaid. Within minutes, Lee was dead from a severed artery in his neck. Within 48 hours, Tracy Andrews would be standing in front of television cameras, tears running down her bruised face, asking the nation to help her find a killer who had never existed. The lie she told that day fooled the country for 7 months, and it made her one of the most notorious female murderers in modern British history. Tracy Andrews was the middle child of 3 siblings and had several half-siblings. Her parents separated when she was 6 years old, and the breakup had a lasting effect on her. Friends and family later described her as possessive, quick-tempered, and prone to explosive displays of anger. In 1990, when she was 21, she gave birth to a daughter. She split from the girl's father about a year later. Andrews dreamed of modelling, but worked behind the bar at a local pub in Redditch to pay the bills. When she met Lee Harvey, the two moved in together at a flat called The Becks in Alvechurch, a village in Worcestershire. People who knew them were uneasy about the relationship from the start. Lee confided in his own mother about Tracy's emotional outbursts. Both families urged the couple to separate. In late October 1996, just 5 weeks before Lee died, police were called to their flat after Andrews bit him on the neck. His mother told him to leave the relationship for the sake of his daughter. He stayed. On the day of the killing, Andrews and Harvey had been arguing all day. They decided to go to a local pub in the evening to try and patch things up. They drove home in Lee's white Ford Escort late that night. The journey should have taken around 10 minutes. It never finished. Somewhere between the pub and the flat, on the dark country road at Cooper's Hill, the Escort pulled over. An argument broke out. Lee got out of the car. Tracy got out after him with a small penknife in her hand, a knife that had been kept in the car. What happened next lasted only minutes. When it was over, Lee Harvey had been stabbed 42 times, in the back, the chest, and the throat. 80 to 100 strands of Tracy's hair were torn out during the struggle and clutched in his dying hand. The fatal wound severed his carotid artery and jugular vein. He lost consciousness within seconds. Tracy did not call an ambulance from the quiet houses meters away. She ran to the nearby Marlbrook pub, covered in her fiancé's blood, screaming. When police arrived, she told them a story. A car had followed them on the lane, she said. 2 men inside. The driver had forced them to stop. The passenger had got out and stabbed Lee for no reason. She said she had been punched in the face trying to defend him. 2 days later, on December 3rd, 1996, Tracy Andrews sat in front of a press conference with 2 black eyes and sobbed as she described the killer. She called him a fat man with staring eyes, a passenger in a Ford Sierra. Britain watched her cry. Britain believed her. The hunt for a road rage killer who did not exist became national news, but the evidence never matched. There were no tyre marks on the grass verges. The Escort had been parked calmly, not slammed into a lay-by by a chasing car. No witnesses on the lane that night had seen a second vehicle following Harvey's car. The pathologist confirmed Lee had been stabbed with a small penknife, and there had been one in the car. Blood spatter at the scene showed Lee had been attacked at the back of the Escort, not the front as Andrews claimed. Strands of her hair in his dying hand told their own story about what had happened during his final seconds. On December 4th, the day after the press conference, Andrews took an overdose and was rushed to hospital. While there, she spent long periods locked in the toilets, apparently disposing of the murder weapon. Police later found a penknife-shaped bloodstain inside one of her boots. The knife itself was never recovered. On December 19, 1996, Tracy Andrews was charged with the murder of Lee Harvey. Her trial began at Birmingham Crown Court on July 1, 1997. She pleaded not guilty and stuck to her road rage story. The jury did not believe her. On July 29, 1997, she was found guilty of murder. Mr. Justice Buckley sentenced her to life imprisonment with a minimum of 14 years. He told her only she knew exactly what went on that night, but everyone had seen the awful consequences. She appealed, and the appeal was rejected in October 1998. Then, in April 1999, Andrews finally admitted she had killed Lee Harvey. In a letter to her solicitor, and later in a paid prison interview, she claimed self-defense, saying Lee had punched her and pulled the knife first. Lee's family rejected her story. She served 14 years and was released from Askham Grange Open Prison near York in 2011 under a new name. Lee's mother Maureen later wrote a book about her grief and the lie that took her son twice, once in death and once in reputation. Tracy Andrews looked the nation in the eye and convinced millions that a stranger had taken her fiancé's life. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next woman on our list never told a lie that sophisticated. She did not need to, because when her own 2 daughters started dying in her care, the people around her missed the signs for weeks. Case 3. Louise Porton. At 5:25 a.m. on January 15, 2018, a 22-year-old mother named Louise Porton dialed 999 from her flat in Beechwood Court, Rugby, Warwickshire. She told the operator her 3-year-old daughter Lexi had stopped breathing. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They found little Lexi Draper completely lifeless, her body already cold to the touch. She had been dead for some time before her mother called for help. 18 days later, on February 1, 2018, Porton made another emergency call. This time it was her 17-month-old daughter, Scarlett Vaughan. Scarlett had stopped breathing too. Paramedics were called to the car park of a budget hotel where Porton had been staying. They found Scarlett just as cold, just as lifeless, just as long gone. 2 small girls, 2 unexplained deaths, barely 2.5 weeks apart. It should have stopped the entire country in its tracks. Instead, it took more than a year of investigation, a mobile phone full of dating apps, and a trail of disturbing internet searches before anyone realised the truth. Louise Porton had killed her own daughters because she said they got in the way of her life. Louise Porton was born in 1996 and lived in the small town of Rugby in Warwickshire. She had her first daughter, Lexi, when she was just 18. Scarlett was born 17 months before her death to a different father. Chris Draper, Lexi's father, had limited contact with Porton after their split. He never even got to meet Scarlett. From August 2016 until November 2017, Porton lived at an address in Willenhall near Walsall, where her landlady ended up doing more and more of the childcare because Porton preferred to be out socialising. Porton described herself online as a model. She was not. She spent long periods on dating apps, sent explicit photos to men she met online in exchange for small amounts of money, and showed little interest in being a full-time mother. The court later heard she would offer photos or sexual acts for as little as £30. By the time she moved to Rugby with her 2 daughters, the pattern was already set. The children were, in the words of the prosecutor at her trial, a burden she had decided to remove. The first warning sign came on January 2nd, 2018. Lexi was rushed to hospital with breathing problems. Doctors could not find a natural cause but assumed it was a chest infection. 2 days later, on January 4th, Lexi was back in hospital in critical condition. Paramedics stabilised her through skilled intervention. At the exact same time these incidents were happening, Porton was using her Google account to search phrases like, "Why did my 3-year-old stop breathing?" and "How long after drowning can someone be revived?" She also read an article about a toddler being brought back after nearly drowning. Police would later establish she had attempted to harm Lexi at least twice before finally succeeding in the early hours of January 15th. While her daughter lay in hospital beds in early January, Porton was in the bathroom sending inappropriate photos to a photographer and arranging paid meetings with men. On the night Lexi finally passed away, Porton's internet browsing history was chilling. She searched for information on how long resuscitation could be effective and how long it took for a body to go cold after death. She then sent a message claiming doctors had told her Lexi was going to die. No doctor had said any such thing. What Louise Porton did in the days after Lexi's death shocked the jury at her eventual trial more than anything else. The day after Lexi died, she accepted 41 friend requests on a dating app called Meet Me. She messaged a man on another app called Badoo, casually mentioning her little girl had passed away the day before, in between chatting about tattoos. She spent the day arranging to meet men. At the funeral parlour where she went to arrange Lexi's funeral, staff saw her on FaceTime with a man, laughing. 2 days after that funeral visit, on February 1st, 2018, Scarlett also died. Porton had been staying at a hotel with the toddler. Evidence showed Scarlett's neck had signs of compression. Porton did not call 999 immediately. She carried Scarlett's body out to her car, drove around pretending she was taking her daughter to hospital, stopped to fill the car up with petrol, and only called 111 afterwards, claiming Scarlett had stopped breathing in her car seat. Messages on her phone showed her asking men online for cash to pay for the fuel, promising to pay them back, and telling one she could not afford to lose another baby. Warwickshire Police launched a full investigation. Doctors could find no natural reason why 2 healthy little girls had died 18 days apart. Both deaths were consistent with deliberate airway obstruction. Porton was arrested. When her phone and internet history were examined, the pattern became overwhelming. She was charged with 2 counts of murder and stood trial at Birmingham Crown Court in the summer of 2019. She pleaded not guilty. She told the jury she loved her daughters and would give them whatever they wanted. She even suggested Lexi might have caused her own injuries by hitting herself on the head with toys. The jury took just 6 hours to reject her story. On August 1st, 2019, she was convicted of both murders. The next day, Mrs. Justice Amanda Yip sentenced her to life with a minimum term of 32 years. The judge told Porton she had squeezed the life out of each of her daughters only calling emergency services when she knew they were already dead. She said there was no evidence of any medical condition or mental disorder to explain the killings. Louise Porton is now held at HMP Foston Hall. Louise Porton showed no emotion and no remorse when 2 tiny coffins were lowered into the ground because of her. The next woman did show emotion. She showed jealousy and possession and the kind of cold hunger that turns a lonely pensioner into prey. And she did not work alone. Case 4. Antuinet Shepherd. On the evening of Sunday, June 18th, 2023, Father's Day, 74-year-old Michael Brady walked into a ground-floor flat on Bowness Close in the Radford area of Coventry. CCTV captured him going in just after 6 p.m. He never came out. Michael was a gentleman, a grandfather, a father, a man whose own family described him as kind, generous, hard-working, and full of laughter. He was also a man living with dementia and Alzheimer's disease, which had changed his life 5 years earlier and left him dependent on the people around him. The woman who invited him in that day was 44-year-old Antuinet Shepherd. She had befriended Michael in the weeks before. She knew he was vulnerable. She knew he carried a bank card. And she was not alone in the flat. Waiting in another room was a 16-year-old boy named Kieran Spicer, holding a machete and a length of blue rope. What followed was one of the most shocking killings the West Midlands had seen in years, and it was planned for one simple reason: money for drink and drugs. Antuinet Shepherd had lived a hard life. Judge Andrew Lockhart KC, who later sentenced her, said she had been struggling for years with alcohol addiction and mental health problems. For 14 years, she had been in a relationship with Kieran Spicer's uncle, and it was through that relationship that she first came into contact with Kieran. When her partner left her, Shepherd held on to the connection with the teenager. By the summer of 2023, she was alone in a rundown flat in Radford, drinking heavily, unstable, and by the judge's own words, almost out of control. Kieran Spicer was not a stable figure either. He had been exposed to drug use before he was even born, placed with his grandmother at 6 months old, and had a long history of mental health struggles and early childhood trauma. Shepherd, the older woman, took over. The judge described what happened next as grooming. A normal family connection between an older woman and her ex-partner's nephew twisted into something very different. The pair spent their time together drinking, taking drugs, and exchanging phone messages about hurting people. The judge called their relationship a powder keg. Michael Brady entered Shepherd's life as a target. She had been having a paid sexual arrangement with him for some time before Father's Day 2023. The judge said this made her hold over him even stronger. It was part of the grooming, part of the setup. Even more chilling was what came out in court about the hours before Michael arrived. Shepherd and Spicer had tried to attack another man earlier that same day, using the exact same machete and the exact same blue rope in the exact same flat. That man talked his way out. He walked away alive. The judge said if he had not, he would have been killed too. The attack on Michael was not an outburst. It was a second attempt. The pair had already decided they wanted to hurt someone for money, and when Michael Brady walked through the door of Bowness Close at 6 p.m. on the 18th of June, he was simply the one who did not escape. What happened inside the flat was savage. Shepherd led Michael into the bedroom. Spicer, 16 years old at the time, burst in with the machete. Michael begged him to stop. He was not listened to. Over the course of the attack, Michael suffered more than 50 separate injuries, including broken bones. Spicer stamped on his chest so hard that several ribs were crushed. Even after that, Michael was still clinging to life. So Shepherd took the blue rope and wrapped it around his neck. The judge told her in court that she literally squeezed the life out of him. Before he died, the pair forced him to give up the PIN numbers for his bank cards. Once he was gone, they bundled his body into a large empty television box, dragged the box out of the flat, and shoved it into a small shed outside. The box was far too small for him. The judge said Michael's body, which deserved respect, had been crammed in without any care at all. Then the two killers went out on a spree. They used his bank card to withdraw more than £300. They spent it on alcohol and drugs. Spicer even used some of the cash to pay for a taxi to visit a woman he had paid for sex. It was the following day, June 19th, 2023, that the whole thing fell apart. Neighbours had heard things. Concerns were raised. Police came to the flat, searched the shed, and found Michael's body. Shepherd was arrested on the spot. When officers answered her phone while searching her flat, Spicer was on the other end. He told them that if they wanted to speak to him, they would have to find him. They did. He had already confessed to a social worker that he had been asked to hide a body. Both were charged with murder. At their trial at Warwick Crown Court, which lasted 4 weeks, they tried to blame each other. Phone messages between them painted a very different picture. One message from Spicer read that he was on one and was going to hurt people. On December 19th, 2023, the jury found them both guilty of murder. At the sentencing hearing on February 9th, 2024, Judge Lockhart passed a life sentence on Antuinet Shepherd with a minimum term of 30 years. Kieran Spicer received 18 years. The judge took the rare step of lifting reporting restrictions so Spicer could be named, saying there was strong public interest in full reporting of such an exceptional case. Antuinet Shepherd is now serving her life sentence. Michael Brady's family live every day with the knowledge that their father walked into that flat, trusting the woman waiting for him. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next woman on our list did not lure a stranger. She did not need to. Her target was already living under her own roof, and the neighbours had been raising concerns for a very long time. Case 5. Angela Gordon. On May 17, 2008, paramedics were called to a terraced house on Leighton Road in the Handsworth area of Birmingham. Inside, a 7-year-old girl named Kyra Ishak had lost her life. Kyra should not have been dying. Months before, she had been a bright, lively, bubbly little girl attending her local school, known to staff as one of the liveliest children in her year. By the time emergency services reached her that morning in May, she was gone, her small body carrying the signs of prolonged and deliberate neglect. She had 6 siblings in the house. Every single one of them was also suffering. The 2 adults responsible for Kyra and her brothers and sisters were her mother, 33-year-old Angela Gordon, and Gordon's partner, Junaid Abu Hamza. What they had been doing to the children behind closed doors in Handsworth would become one of the most damning child protection failures the city of Birmingham had ever seen, and it would lead to a national debate about how the state looks after children who are taken out of school. Angela Gordon had 6 children in total, with her former husband, Ishak Abu Zair. According to the family's history, Abu Zair left the home some years before Kyra's death, and Gordon was raising the children on her own for a period. In late 2007, a friend of her former husband, a man named Junaid Abu Hamza, moved into the family home and took on a parental role. The serious case review later produced by Birmingham Safeguarding Children Board described Abu Hamza as coming from a traumatic background himself. Once he moved in, the situation inside the house began to change. The 4 oldest children, including Kyra, attended a local primary school. The 5th attended a special school because of his additional needs. From early 2008 onwards, staff at those schools began noticing worrying signs. Children were coming in hungry, taking food from other children's lunchboxes and behaving as if they had not eaten. Teachers raised concerns. They raised them loudly, and they raised them more than once. When schools flagged concerns to Birmingham's Children's Social Care in January and February 2008, something should have happened. It did not. Visits were incomplete. Proper assessments were not carried out. In February 2008, Angela Gordon took the step of removing her children from school altogether. She told the local authority she was going to educate them at home. Under the law in England, that was her right. Once the children were no longer attending school, the alarm bells from teachers grew louder. Staff at the school kept contacting social services. They were repeatedly told there was nothing more that could be done because the children were no longer in the education system. The reality inside the house was something very different. According to evidence later heard at Birmingham Crown Court, the 6 children were being held to a strict punishment regime run by Abu Hamza and enforced by Gordon. They were made to eat, if they were fed at all, in their bedroom. They were beaten with a bamboo cane. They were made to stand outside in cold weather wearing almost nothing as a form of discipline. Food was kept locked away. Kyra and her siblings could see it, but could not touch it. The final weeks of Kyra's life were devastating. She caught a chest infection, and the combination of her weakened condition and long-term lack of food meant her body simply could not recover. On the morning of the 17th of May 2008, she passed away in the family home. When she was examined, she weighed just 2 stone 9 pounds at the age of 7. That is roughly the weight of an average child half her age. Medical experts later estimated she had lost around 40% of her body weight in the months before her death. Her 5 surviving siblings were all underweight, all showing signs of prolonged neglect, and all severely traumatized. They were taken straight into care. Gordon and Abu Hamza were both arrested. The case shocked the country, not only because of what had been done to the children, but because of how many chances the system had been given to step in and had missed every single one. Angela Gordon and Junaid Abu Hamza were charged with murder. Their first trial at Birmingham Crown Court in 2009 collapsed after 3 members of the jury were discharged. A retrial began in early 2010. During that retrial, prosecutors accepted guilty pleas from both defendants on the lesser charge of manslaughter by diminished responsibility. Gordon admitted she had been responsible for what happened to her daughter, but psychiatric evidence was accepted that her mental state at the time meant she did not have full responsibility for murder. On March 3, 2010, Mr. Justice Roderick Evans sentenced both defendants. Angela Gordon was given 15 years in prison for the manslaughter of her own daughter, plus additional time for the cruelty shown to the 5 surviving siblings. Junaid Abu Hamza received an indefinite hospital order for the same offences. After the trial, the Birmingham Safeguarding Children Board commissioned a serious case review. Published in July 2010, the review was the first ever published in full and concluded that every single agency involved with the family had failed Kyra. Michael Gove, who was Education Secretary at the time, said that Kyra had endured painful abuse over many months and that her death could and should have been prevented. Angela Gordon was released from prison in 2017 after serving half her sentence. Kyra's father Ishak successfully sued Birmingham City Council for negligence. Kyra's siblings had to grow up knowing that the adults paid to protect them had failed to do so. Angela Gordon let a strict man she had only known for a few months rule her children's lives until her own daughter paid the ultimate price. The next woman on our list was not raising children with a controlling partner. She was trying to get rid of one, and when she did, she spent the next 20 minutes on the phone to her father, not to emergency services. Case 6. Amy Pew. On the evening of 22nd March 2022, paramedics raced to a property on Aston Drive in Newport, Shropshire, a quiet market town about 20 miles north of Telford. When they arrived at 9:15 p.m, they found a 34-year-old woman performing CPR on the kitchen floor. The man lying underneath her was her estranged husband, 29-year-old Kyle Pew. She told the paramedics he had hanged himself with his own belt. He was rushed to Princess Royal Hospital. He died the following day, March 23, 2022. For nearly 3 years, Amy Pew stuck to the same story. Kyle had taken his own life. Kyle had always been vulnerable. She had tried to save him, just like she had saved him before. But phone records, a broken nose, a missing mobile phone, and one strange video call to her father would unravel every piece of that story. When a jury finally heard the truth at Stafford Crown Court, they took only 8 hours to decide Amy Pew had murdered the man she once married. Amy Pew and Kyle Pew had been married, but by early 2022, their relationship had broken down. Kyle had moved on. He was in a new relationship. He was a well-known figure in the local community in Telford, working as an MC and as the founder of his own design business called Design Dudes UK. His family described him as a visionary, a man of many talents, loved by many. Amy, according to what later came out in court, had not moved on. The judge who later sentenced her, Judge Christina Montgomery KC, described their relationship as toxic, saying that as things deteriorated, the boundaries between victim and aggressor had blurred. The relationship had produced moments of extreme behaviour from Amy long before Kyle's death. On October 15, 2021, About 5 months before the killing, she set fire to Kyle's workshop. That garage was where he created his artwork. While it burned to the ground, Amy filmed videos of the flames and sent them to Kyle, singing the Johnny Cash song, Ring of Fire, over the footage. She was later convicted of arson for that act in November 2024 and received a 19-month suspended sentence. The warning signs about what she was capable of were already there. The night of March 22, 2022, began with Kyle visiting Amy at her Aston Drive home. Alcohol was involved. The old tensions surfaced. An argument erupted, specifically about the relationships they had both formed since splitting up. Just after 8:30 p.m, that argument turned physical. According to the prosecution, Amy hit Kyle, he struck her back, and she then grabbed him and pulled him down. What followed was a violent compression of his neck. The post-mortem examination later revealed fatal neck compression injuries, along with fractures to his nose and his eye socket. At some point during this violence, Kyle fell unconscious. Amy realised he was not moving. What she did next became one of the most damning parts of her case. She did not call 999. Instead, at 8:45 p.m, she picked up the phone and called her father. For the next 20 minutes, she spoke to him repeatedly, including a 6-minute video call. While Kyle lay dying on her kitchen floor, Amy used that time to talk things through with her father. At around 8:55 p.m, Kyle's mobile rang. It was his new girlfriend trying to check in on him. Amy answered his phone. She told the girlfriend, according to the trial evidence, that Kyle was her husband, that he was never coming back, and that this was where he was staying. Kyle's phone was never recovered after that call. It disappeared entirely. Amy did not dial 999 until 9:05 p.m, a full 20 minutes after she says she found Kyle. When emergency services finally arrived, she was performing CPR on him. She told the call handler he had hanged himself. She told police he had tried to end his own life many times before, and she had saved him in the past. She used Kyle's real mental health history to build a lie she hoped would never be challenged. Amy Pew was arrested on April 1, 2022, but West Mercia police knew almost immediately that something about her story did not match the physical evidence. The case took years to build. Detectives needed expert medical evidence to prove the exact cause of death. Phone records, call logs, and forensic reconstructions were painstakingly assembled. Kyle's injuries, particularly the fractures to his face alongside the neck compression, did not fit the story Amy was telling. She was finally charged with his murder in November 2024. Her 6-week trial at Stafford Crown Court began in 2025, and on 12 June 2025, the jury returned a guilty verdict after around 8 hours of deliberation. On September 5, 2025, Judge Christina Montgomery, KC, sentenced Amy Pew to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 14 years, minus 288 days already served on remand. In her sentencing remarks, the judge said that rather than calling for emergency services, Amy had chosen to speak to her father over multiple calls, and that it was during those calls she had decided to concoct her lie and blame Kyle for his own death. The judge also said that if help had been called sooner, there was a real possibility Kyle's life could have been saved. Detective Inspector Joe Dennehy, who led the investigation, called it unusual to see a female convicted of a domestic murder. Amy Pew waited 20 minutes while her life ebbed away, and then chose a lie over help. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next woman on our list did not bother with a lie. She walked into the room, carried out her plan, and left her victim where she fell. And the person who found her was the woman's own daughter. Case 7. Jessica Crane. On the morning of March 9, 2021, 69-year-old Janet Mason drove from her home in the village of Powick, just outside Worcester, to her own mother's house with a bag of groceries. Janet was the kind of daughter who visited every few days. Her 90-year-old mother lived alone in a house in Worcester, and Janet was her main source of support, handling the shopping and the cleaning for a woman who had lived a long life and simply needed help. Janet had 5 children of her own, 4 sons and 1 daughter. That morning, her 49-year-old daughter, Jessica Crane, was already inside the house, upstairs in the bedroom. At around 10:30 a.m., Jessica came down to the kitchen where her mother was cleaning. They began to argue. Within minutes, Janet was screaming. She stumbled into the living room, bleeding heavily, and collapsed into a chair. Her own elderly mother watched her die. The person who called the emergency services was Jessica herself. She told them she had just attacked her mother with a knife. By the time police arrived, Janet was gone. The knife was a 25-centimetre kitchen blade, and Jessica had plunged it into her mother's back. Jessica Crane's life had not been an easy one. According to evidence later heard at her trial and detailed in a formal domestic homicide review, Jessica had a diagnosis of obsessive-compulsive disorder along with a progressive depressive disorder. Clinicians later suggested she was more likely to have borderline personality disorder with antisocial traits. She had worked for 6 years as a checkout operator at a supermarket, but had been off sick for 7 months at the time of the killing. She had a rare inherited medical condition that caused lung and liver problems. She had been diagnosed with emphysema. She used cannabis heavily, up to 2 grams a day, and had been through treatment services on 2 occasions without managing to come off the drug entirely. She had one significant past relationship, which had ended years before, and no children. Her only close family was her mother Janet and her 90-year-old grandmother. Jessica described the family as broken. She said her mother had been cruel to her as a child, but loving to her brothers. She said her grandmother had been emotionally cold. According to Jessica, at the age of 11 she had gone to live with her grandmother, and the relationship had never really recovered. By the autumn of 2020, Jessica's mental health was collapsing. She was having near-weekly contact with her GP surgery. She attended 11 sessions of psychological counselling between November 2020 and February 2021. She told the psychologist she was having suicidal thoughts. She described intense self-hatred. She spoke about her anger towards both her mother and her grandmother. She was moving between her own flat and her grandmother's house, saying she could not bear to live on her own. In January 2021, her suicidal thoughts became severe enough that her GP switched her antidepressant medication, and she was briefly assessed by the Crisis Resolution Team. By February, she had been accepted into the Community Assessment and Recovery Service, known as Carass. On February 10, 2021, during her 11th and final session with her psychologist, Jessica said something that would later look like a direct warning. She described having thoughts of stabbing her mother. The psychologist treated it as an expression of emotional distress rather than a genuine threat. The DHR later concluded that professionals had focused on the risk Jessica posed to herself and had not fully considered the risk she posed to other people. The days before the killing saw Jessica under increasing stress. She was worried about losing her job, losing her flat, managing her anxiety, and caring for her grandmother. On 25 February 2021, she had told a social prescriber that she had petrol in her shed and was waiting to get the courage to set fire to her flat. An ambulance was called and a safety plan was agreed where she would stay at her grandmother's house. On 2nd March, a week before the killing, she was speaking to her care coordinator and her GP about returning to work. On March 9, 2021, the morning her mother came to deliver the groceries, Jessica was living in her grandmother's house. When she came downstairs to the kitchen that morning, there was an argument. Jessica later told police that her mother had made a comment about her being sectioned. She said she had flipped, picked up a kitchen knife, and stabbed her mother in the back. The knife went in once, but it was enough. Jessica Crane was arrested for grievous bodily harm at the scene. Once it was confirmed that Janet had died, she was rearrested on suspicion of murder. In the police interview, she admitted attacking her mother, but claimed she had lost control because of her mental health. Her trial took place at Worcester Crown Court and lasted 9 days in February 2022. She pleaded not guilty to murder. Her defence offered 2 alternatives for the jury to consider: lack of intent and manslaughter by diminished responsibility. The prosecution, led by Richard Atkins QC, presented extensive medical, psychological, and psychiatric evidence. The jury rejected both defences. They returned the unanimous verdict of murder on 10th February 2022. Jessica Crane was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 12.5 years. A domestic homicide review later found that the agencies involved had focused almost entirely on the threat Jessica posed to herself, and that the warning signs about the risk to her own mother had not been properly shared between services. Janet Mason was a grandmother, a mother, and a daily carer for her own mum, and she died bleeding in the chair of the woman who had raised her. The next woman on our list did not raise the hand that killed the child in her care, but she stood right next to it. She watched. And when her 9-year-old son stopped breathing in a bath of cold water, she told the paramedics he had just fallen asleep. Case 8. Carla Scott. At 2:24 p.m. on February 18, 2021, during the middle of the national lockdown, a mother in Droitwich, Worcestershire, dialed 999 and told the operator that her 9-year-old son had fallen asleep in the bath. His name was Alfie Steele. He was a Year 5 pupil, described by his grandfather as a charming, funny, inquisitive boy whose cheeky smile could melt your heart. By the time paramedics arrived at the small house on Vashon Drive, Alfie was lifeless. He had more than 50 injuries on his body. A post-mortem examination was unable to say with certainty whether the cause was drowning, a serious head injury, or lack of oxygen, only that any of those 3 possibilities could have ended his life. The woman who made that 999 call was his 35-year-old mother, Carla Scott. What neither the paramedics nor the police yet knew was that Alfie had not fallen asleep in the bath. He had been taken there against his will, and he had been taken there because it was the final act of a cruel regime that had been running inside that house for well over a year. A neighbour had tried to warn the authorities about it. The warning had not been enough. Carla Scott was a mother with a long history known to local agencies. Alfie was her child from a previous relationship that had ended in 2017 and which had itself involved contact with children's services. In July 2019, she began dating a man from the Newtown area of Birmingham named Dirk Howell. He was 41 years old. Within 6 months they became engaged. They never set a wedding date. According to evidence later heard at trial, Howell was a controlling and violent figure, and from the moment he moved into Carla Scott's life, the atmosphere inside the family home began to shift. Witnesses in the street saw him shouting and swearing at Alfie and heard him using threats and insults. They saw Scott let it happen. The prosecutor at the trial, Michelle Healy KC, told the jury that Scott put her loyalty to her partner above every other consideration, including her own son. Social services became involved and imposed conditions, at one point banning Howell from staying at the home overnight. According to the prosecution, Scott ignored the rule continuously and let him stay anyway. She knew what he was like. She let him stay. The cruelty inside the house on Vashon Drive was not random. It was a regime. Over the months that followed, Alfie was whipped with belts and with a heavy rubber sandal known as a slider. He was denied food as a punishment. He was forced to stand outside the house in cold weather, and jugs of water were thrown over him. Most sinister of all was the bath. Alfie was made to stand in cold water, dunked under it as a so-called form of discipline. He had asthma. The practice was, in the judge's later words, dangerous and frightening. Other children who stayed at the house were affected too. Neighbours heard things. One of them called 999 about 6 months before Alfie died, warning police that the couple were doing something bad to their child in the bath. Agencies including the police, children's services and Alfie's school had contact with the family. Scott and Howell lied to all of them, repeatedly, to cover up what they were doing. Alfie went to school. His teachers had concerns. The warnings were raised, but the full picture of what was happening behind closed doors did not reach the people who could have acted. On the afternoon of February 18, 2021, Alfie resisted getting into the bath. The judge later said it may have been that resistance that sealed his fate. He called out for his grandfather. No one came. He was repeatedly struck to the body and head. He was submerged in the bath water. By the time Scott rang 999 at 2:24 p.m, Alfie was already dead. The judge found that she had waited at least an hour after his death before making the call. Howell had already fled the house. When police arrived, Scott told them Alfie had hit his head and fallen asleep submerged in the water. she showed no signs of the truth. When Howell was later traced, he claimed that Alfie had suffered an epileptic fit and fallen asleep. Both were arrested. Both were charged with murder. Both denied every element of what had happened inside their own home. The trial at Coventry Crown Court lasted 6 weeks in the spring of 2023. The jury heard from neighbours, from teachers, from medical experts, and saw photos of the injuries on Alfie's small body. Howell pleaded guilty during the trial to the child cruelty charges. Scott denied everything. On the morning of June 15, 2023, the jury returned its verdicts. Dirk Howell was convicted of murder. Carla Scott was cleared of murder but found guilty of manslaughter by a majority verdict, along with 4 separate counts of child cruelty. Later that same day, Mr. Justice Mark Wall KC sentenced them. Howell received life imprisonment with a minimum term of 32 years, the judge describing the killing as sadistic. Scott was sentenced to 21 years for manslaughter and 6 years for the child cruelty offences, to run one after the other. The total was 27 years, with a minimum of 17 years to serve before she could be considered for release. As Scott was led from the dock, a member of the public gallery shouted "evil swine" at her. Alfie's grandfather told the court his grandson had been robbed of his life. A safeguarding review was commissioned to examine how all the warning signs had been missed. Carla Scott chose a man over a child, and a child paid the ultimate price. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next woman on our list did not grow to hate her partner over years of tension. She killed the man she once loved within hours of seeing his profile on a dating app, and she did it on Christmas Day. Case 9. Kirsty Carass. In the early hours of 25th December 2024, Christmas morning, a taxi pulled up outside a quiet family home on Elm Road in Norton Keynes, a village on the edge of Cannock in Staffordshire. A 33-year-old woman stepped out. She had a kitchen knife with her. She had travelled from her own home in Cannock, about 4 miles away, and she had told the driver to wait. She let herself into the house with a key. Around 30 seconds later, the taxi driver heard a loud, prolonged scream coming from inside. It was a man's voice, and it sounded scared. Less than 2 minutes after she had gone in, the woman came back out. She was anxious. She was sweating. She told the driver to take her to her parents' home. The house she had just left belonged to the parents of 31-year-old Louis Price. Inside, Louis was bleeding to death on the floor. He was a father of 6. The woman in the taxi was Kirsty Carass, his ex-partner. She had just ended his life because a friend had shown her a picture of his profile on a dating app. Kirsty Carass had been in a relationship with Louis Price that had already turned violent long before Christmas morning. Louis himself had described it to police as abusive. In a witness statement given to officers in 2024, he said that on the whole, the relationship had been abusive, that she had constantly been abusive towards him, stopped him from doing things he enjoyed like playing football, and physically attacked him. On November 11, 2024, about 6 weeks before Louis died, he had dialed 999 himself to report her. He told officers she had poured bleach over tracksuits worth £400, thrown a glass candle holder at him, pulled him down the stairs, and put her hands around his throat. Body-worn video footage from that incident was later shown in court. Kirsty Carass was arrested over the November attack and placed on police bail. Conditions were imposed to stop her from having contact with Louis. They were ordered to live at separate addresses. Louis, in fear, moved back into his parents' home on Elm Road. A public protection notice was submitted for consideration at a multi-agency risk assessment conference. That is the point the system had reached by Christmas Eve 2024. Louis spent Christmas Eve with his family. Kirsty spent it at a pub, drinking double vodka and cokes with a male friend. She also took cocaine. Throughout the evening, she tried to call Louis over and over again. In total, she phoned him 26 times that night. At some point during the evening, a friend showed her a picture on a phone. It was Louis Price's profile on the dating app, Tinder. For Kirsty, that image was the trigger. According to the prosecution at her trial, her reaction was not a sudden loss of control. It was a plan. She left the male friend's house, took a taxi back to her own home on Hayling Way in Cannock, went inside and picked up a 12-inch kitchen knife. She then got into a second taxi and told the driver to take her to Louis Price's parents' house in Norton Keynes. She believed, according to her own later evidence, that he might also be with another woman at his family home. She carried the knife the whole way. What happened inside the house took only seconds. Louis was in the conservatory of his parents' home. Kirsty used a key to enter. She confronted him. She plunged the kitchen knife into his chest. The blade travelled 12 centimetres deep, through his skin, a rib, his lung, and into his heart. He died almost instantly. The pathologist's report made clear that the single stab wound was catastrophic and fatal within moments. Louis managed the one prolonged scream that the taxi driver heard from the road. Then Kirsty Carass was back outside and in the taxi again, telling the driver to take her to her parents' house. When she arrived there, she admitted what she had done, and the emergency services were called. Louis's parents found their son in their own conservatory on the morning they were meant to be spending together as a family. Staffordshire police arrested Kirsty Carass within hours. She was charged with murder, possession of an offensive weapon, intentional strangulation, and assault occasioning actual bodily harm relating to the 11th November attack. She denied all of it. On 31st of January 2025, at Stafford Crown Court, she pleaded not guilty. Her trial took place in July 2025. In her own evidence, Carass claimed she had no memory of stabbing Louis. She said she was not a violent person. She said she had only gone to his parents' address because she believed he had taken money from inside a card she had at home, and that she had picked up the knife with the intention of destroying a caravan he was using in the back garden. She told the jury she panicked after he was stabbed and fled the scene. On July 30th, 2025, after around a day of deliberation, a jury of 7 men and 5 women unanimously found her guilty of murder and of possession of an offensive weapon in a public place. They also found her guilty, by a majority of 11-1, of assault occasioning actual bodily harm relating to the November incident. She was cleared of the intentional strangulation charge. The next day, 31st July 2025, Mr. Justice Chowdhury sentenced her to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years. He told her she had shown no remorse and had destroyed the life of a young man and his family. Louise's mother Eleanor, who read out a victim impact statement in court, said her son had been murdered by the woman he loved. Louise's father Graham said his fishing buddy, his best friend, was gone. Louise's 6 children no longer have a father. Kirsty Carass, killed because a photograph on a screen told her a story she did not want to read. The final woman on our list did not need jealousy to start her. She did not need alcohol or cocaine. She killed because, by her own words, she found it entertaining. And over the space of 10 days, she would turn a quiet English city into the hunting ground of one of the most chilling female killers this country has ever produced. Case 10. Joanna Dennehy. At 10:04 a.m. on Saturday, March 30th, 2013, a member of the public walking near the village of Newborough, just outside Peterborough in Cambridgeshire, came across a body lying in a roadside ditch. The body was male, it had stab wounds to the chest, and it had been dressed in a black sequined cocktail dress. It was posed to degrade the victim even in death. When detectives identified the man, they discovered he was 48-year-old Kevin Lee, a property developer and landlord from Peterborough who had been reported missing by his wife the day before. 5 days later, on the 3rd of April, a second member of the public stumbled across 2 more bodies, dumped together in a ditch at Fenland Field in Thorney, just a few miles away. One was a 31-year-old Polish man named Łukasz Slabaszewski. The other was a 56-year-old Royal Navy veteran named John Chapman. Within 10 days of each other, 3 men had been killed in and around Peterborough. The woman responsible was hunting for more. Her name was Joanna Christine Dennehy, and by the time she was caught, she would become only the 3rd woman in British history to be sentenced never to leave prison. Joanna Dennehy was born in August 1982 in St Albans, Hertfordshire, and grew up in the affluent commuter town of Harpenden. She came from a stable, hard-working family. She left home as a teenager, drifting between addresses, and slid into a life of petty crime, alcohol, and drug abuse. She had 2 daughters from a long-term relationship, but became an absent mother to both of them. In 2012, she was imprisoned for theft, where medical staff diagnosed her with antisocial personality disorder. After her release, she drifted into Peterborough, where she met Kevin Lee, a 48-year-old family man who ran a housing business providing cheap accommodation to people at the bottom of the rental ladder. Dennehy moved into one of his bedsits. She and Lee began a sexual relationship. She also became his enforcer, used to collect rent from tenants who were struggling to pay. She shared a bedsit in Rolleston Garth with a man called John Chapman. She was already living among the people who would soon be her victims. Psychiatrists later diagnosed her with psychopathic, antisocial, and borderline personality disorders, and with sexual sadism. She told a psychiatrist after the murders that she had killed her first victim to see if she was as cold as she thought she was. That first victim, Lukas Slabashevsky, had met Dennehy only days before his death. He was a Polish delivery driver who thought he had just met an English girlfriend. He told a friend, in the days leading up to his death, that life was beautiful. Somewhere between 19 and 29 March 2013, Dennehy lured him to the Rolleston Garth property and killed him with a pocket knife. She later hid his body in a wheelie bin. She then showed the body to a 14-year-old girl she had befriended. On 29th March 2013, she killed twice in a single day. Her housemate John Chapman was first. She stabbed him while he was in the bedsit. Minutes later, she telephoned her accomplice Gary Stretch and, according to trial evidence, sang the Britney Spears lyric, "Oops, I Did It Again," down the phone. Later that same day, she turned on Kevin Lee. He had been trying to evict her from the bedsit. She lured him to the property with the promise of sex. When he arrived, she stabbed him 5 times in the chest. She then dressed his body in the black sequin dress and, with Stretch's help, drove it to the ditch in Newborough and dumped it. With Kevin Lee's body still undiscovered at dawn the next day, Dennehy and Stretch went on the run. Stretch was a 47-year-old man of around 7 feet 3 inches in height, who had become obsessed with her. A third man called Mark Lloyd was travelling with them unwillingly and was later cleared of any criminal involvement. While police hunted them, Dennehy decided she wanted more victims. On April 2, 2013, the trio drove 140 miles southwest to Hereford. There, within a window of just 9 minutes, Dennehy got out of the car and attacked 2 men at random. Both were dog walkers. The first, 64-year-old Robin Bereza, was stabbed in the back of the shoulder. He survived. The second, 56-year-old John Rogers, was stabbed around 40 times and left for dead. He also somehow survived. Dennehy stole John Rogers' dog and took it with her. By this point, she had told her accomplices she wanted to kill 9 men in total. She told them she wanted to be like Bonnie and Clyde. CCTV tracked Dennehy to a petrol station where she had stopped to buy tobacco. On the afternoon of 2nd April, police traced her to a green Vauxhall Astra parked at Newman Close in the Newton Farm area of Hereford. Officers approached the car and arrested Dennehy and Stretch without resistance. When searched, Dennehy was carrying a 9-centimetre pocket knife caked in blood. She was taken to the police station where she laughed and joked with officers, at one point saying at least she was not fat. She was charged with 3 counts of murder and 2 of attempted murder. In November 2013, she pleaded guilty to all of them. At her sentencing hearing at the Old Bailey on 28th of February 2014, Mr. Justice Spencer told her she was a cruel, calculating, selfish and manipulative serial killer. He called her sadomasochistic and said she lacked the normal range of human emotions. He imposed a whole life order, meaning she will die in prison. She was the 3rd woman in British legal history to ever receive that sentence, after Myra Hindley and Rose West. Gary Stretch was sentenced to life with a minimum of 19 years. Leslie Layton got 14 years. Robert Moore got 3 years for assisting an offender. In 2015, prison staff at HMP Bronzefield uncovered a plan in Dennehy's diary to escape by killing or injuring a prison officer and using a severed finger to bypass the biometric fingerprint scanner. She remains in prison today. A psychiatrist who assessed her described murder as Moorish to her, that she had developed a taste for it. 10 lives were affected in 10 days. 3 ended, 2 barely survived. Entire families were shattered, and one woman stood in the middle of it all, laughing at police, singing Britney Spears, and telling anyone who would listen that she had done it all because she simply found it fun. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.